To the cloud here. All right. So I'll just do a little introduction, Ellen, and then we'll get started. So welcome everybody to Peter White Public Library and to Artists and Their Art, which is going to be the second part of Ellen's talk on Goya. I have to just go over a few things here to make you aware of some events that are happening later this week. Tomorrow night here at the pub at Peter White in the community room at 7 p.m. We are going to be having Chris Valenti in concert. And if you've never seen Chris Valenti in concert, he's a really, really wonderful musician who does throwback tunes from the 50s and 60s and 70s. Just wonderful. That program will be live streamed as well on our YouTube channel. So if you don't want to or can't make it to the library itself in the community room, you can watch that on our YouTube channel at 7 p.m. tomorrow night. And then on this coming Saturday, we have our second annual Joy Festival. And that's going to be an all-day long event starting at about 10 o'clock. And that's going to have yoga, music, poetry, and all kinds of stuff in the spirit of Helen Haskell Ramin, who used to own the Joy Center here in Marquette County, the Marquette area, and was a really wonderful supporter of the arts for a very, very long time. So we have that on Saturday as well. And then coming up next week, we have quite a few things coming up, especially I'll just make you aware of a concert which is going to be next Tuesday, I believe. Yes, next Tuesday. It's Blues Day Tuesday, next Tuesday, and that is going to be the Flat Broke Blues Band. And if you've never seen the Flat Broke Blues Band, and you're in the Marquette area, I really encourage you to come in and see that concert. But if you can't make that concert, again, it's going to be live streamed. All right. Well, that's what's coming up here at Peter White. And then next month, of course, is April, which is National Poetry Month, and it's going to be our third annual Great Lakes Poetry Festival. And our headline poet this coming for this festival is going to be a wonderful, wonderful poet named Diane Glancy. She's won the American Book Award, all kinds of other awards. She's an internationally renowned poet. And she's going to be joining us here at Peter White during the Great Lakes Poetry Festival. So lots of great things coming up in April as well. Well, I'm going to turn things now over to Ellen. I think that most people know who Ellen is. I will say this: Ellen needs no introduction. Everybody knows who Ellen is and knows. And if you've been coming to these artists and their art presentations, you know how wonderful she is at talking about the work of these artists. So anyway, please give a big welcome to Ellen Longsworth. Turn it over to you, Ellen. Go ahead.
Well, thank you all very much for being with me, with us, and sorry about the delay, but here we go. Some of you who were with me 3 months ago may remember that Goya was involved fairly early on in his career in quite an enormous and important project, tapestry cartoons for the Royal Palace in Madrid. And eventually he will be appointed painter to the king, and that comes in, excuse me, 1786. He's born, by the way, in 1746. And you see a room full of some of these tapestry designs. And just to refresh your memories concerning them, he began working on these in 1775, and there was a break for a time. And then he resumed working on these tapestries for another number of years. Now, on the left side of this screen are two early images that he created. the parasol, and then hide and seek, and then the lovely little child in the center with his confreres. But after the break in the, oh, it would be the early um, 1780s, he changed, um, you could say, his being as far as his artistic interests were concerned. And on the right hand side are two images. I can't see them too well because they're hidden by my picture, but the top one shows you a very fat, red clad man, an aristocrat perhaps, but moneyed anyway. And he's ugly as sin, and he's about to wed a lovely little woman, certainly because this practice would help support her family. We'll see such images such as this again. And then the snowstorm at the bottom is another indication of the lack of lightheartedness any longer in Goya's work in the later 80s, as these figures are huddled together, not by any means enjoying the storm, or where are they going? Are they going to weather it or be destroyed by it? This image also, you might remember from the last time, it introduces us to the monsters that will people Goya's mind and art literally for the rest of his life. The other point you might want to, or I should make about this painting, is the cadaver. Now, in a classically inspired dying scene, the nude male figure, as we have it here, would be beautifully rendered, but this is a real dead cadaver. This is Goya. There's no other such painting like this at the time nor subsequently. I thought you'd like to see this image of the artist. It's rather upbeat, one of his many self-portraits. And now we're into new territory. I didn't show this to y'all last time. In 1792, so a couple of years after he began working on this self-portrait, he was taken down by a terrible, terrible illness. We do not know what it was. Some reports say, well, it must have been syphilis. Some say a terrible, debilitating ear infection. But the point being, in the next year, in 1793, this artist was stone deaf and would remain deaf for the rest of his life. This also changed his outlook on life and his surroundings, which became even darker because of the political situation in Spain, which we're approaching. In any event, we see him here clad in a handsome jacket, which is actually the kind of garb that bullfighters at the time wore. He was a great fan of bullfighting, so we can end there and go forward. Now, one of the major series of images which he created now at this time, after his deafness laid him low, and when he began seriously rethinking what he wanted to present as an artist. And this series of aquatints and etchings, as you can see, is called Los Caprichos, caprices. They're not exactly caprices. And they were created by Goya to be circulated to be sold. And as you can see here by this caption, they were published as an album in 1799. However, only 27 copies of this album were sold before they were taken off the market. Again, reports vary either by the king, Charles IV, or by Goya himself, because they or he um, was aware that the Inquisition, which was a very strong and influential institution at this time in Spain, looked very unfavorably on this series of images. Now, this is what Goya wrote in the advertisement, in part in the advertisement for this album. He chose subjects from the multitude of follies and blunders common in every civil society, as well as from the vulgar prejudices and lies authorized by custom, ignorance, or interest, those that he thought most suitable as matter for ridicule. He also stated, and this is not a direct quote, that his aim was didactic and moralizing in presenting these images to a public which he had hoped would consume them readily, which, of course, as you know, did not happen. One of my major sources, the art historian Fred Licht, with whom I studied actually, wrote this about Los Caprichos, just in brief, as one of the most startling mirrors, these images, as one of the most startling mirrors of human and suprahuman folly. Now, I can't, of course, show you all 80, but I've selected some images which are characteristic of the two halves of Los Caprichos. There's a kind of before and an after, as you'll see. The first image is of the artist himself. And by the way, you might recall that he learned this technique or these techniques.
Robert Longsworth.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry. That he learned these techniques.
Robert Longsworth.
I'm sorry. Yeah, let me take the phone. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's my nephew. These techniques from studying Rembrandt. And here he shows himself as quite a different soul than you saw in that self-image from 1995. In any event, this rather wary-looking image of the author opens up the series of aquatints and etchings. Love and Death. Here is someone who it looks as though has been taken down, perhaps in a duel. You notice the sword in the lower left-hand corner. What you should notice also is the fact that although these figures are leaning against a wall made up of blocks of some sort, there really is no setting. And the contrasts of light and dark in these images, which in some cases, as you'll see, make no visual sense, add to not only the ambiguity of the image, as in what really is going on or what really went on, because Goya doesn't tell us. And you might be interested to know that Charles Baudelaire, in one of his works on artistic practice in 1842, wrote this: light and shade play in Goya's images, play upon his atrocious horrors. And we'll see this over and over again. This I can tell you a little bit more about in terms of the genesis of such an appalling image, it was understood that the teeth of a hanged man would bring good luck, so would act as a talisman. For whatever reason, you might want to use those teeth or that tooth. And so here is this woman extracting a tooth from this hanged man. They both stand on a ledge. Where does the ledge go? Where does it come from? Again, it's ambiguous, as is the background. Goya simply does not construct his images based upon classical ideals, to say the least. Many of his images in Los Caprichos are anti-clerical. Here is one that I particularly liked. They are hot. What does that mean? It's a satirical caption. And by the way, all of these captions were realized by Goya and written by him at the base of these images. I mention that because that will not always be the case, as we'll see at the very end of this discussion of his middle and late works. In any event, here are these monks, ghoulish. They're hot. Are they eating something hot? I mean, what does that mean? And here is one of the several images that harken back to that tapestry design. A lovely young woman is going to be wed to this monster of a man. Clearly he's wealthy, and it's for the good of her family. But what a sacrifice indeed. Now here, that's not sarcasm. That's the truth of the matter. So there are numerous levels of meaning, not only in the captions, but also in what we can make of the images. Sometimes it's fairly clear, as here, and sometimes it's not, as you'll see. Here is an image that Fred Licht, by the way, particularly liked, because this poor little boy has just broken a dish, the pitcher, as Goya tells us, and his mother is going wild like a beast. Look at her face. And she grabs at his clothing like a wild animal, is about to just hammer the bejesus out of him. And he broke a pitcher. The setting again is fairly nondescript. They're in a laundry room, but you know, what is the nature of the space, the nature of the setting. And I'm sure that many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with this iconic image from a little past the middle of Los Caprichos. The sleep of reason produces monsters, which is written on the, of course, in Spanish, on the desk, you could call it the table on which the author has fallen asleep. And bats and owls, a leering cat, a very aware lynx are now surrounding this figure. And from now on, the images become even more strange and peopled, as it were, by creatures such as you see here, as well as other creatures of the dark. Here are two witches. They're fully bodied, look like rather ugly human beings, but where are they in space? Here's a particularly ambiguous image. Are they flying upwards? Are they catapulting downwards? And what is the beast below them doing? And there's also a beast above them, which is nearly incomprehensible because it's nearly as dark as the I will call it sky, but as the aquatint that surrounds it. Who would believe it? What's going on? What should we believe? That these creatures exist? They existed in Goya's mind. And here we have another anti-clerical image that I thought was quite amusing, if I may so say. These creatures, half human and half monstrous, are singing along with two priests who are nearly as monstrous as those that accompany them. And the priests are holding the songbook by pliers. Nothing particularly subtle about this. And then two heads, bodiless. And is that a hawk or some kind of winged creature on which the clerics are floating? Where are the beautiful clouds and the angels? And this is the last image of Los Caprichos. What this means is it's time for these monsters to leave because it's daybreak and the author is waking up and reason will assume itself once again and therefore not allow these figures any presence, any time, until reason sleeps again. Now, quickly, because there's quite a lot more to go here, I thought it would be useful to share this with you. This is from Fred Licht's essay on Goya as well. And Salvatore Rosa was one of the few artists that is, Fred was aware of, who created images of witches and witchcraft, practices of witchcraft, and so on and so forth, and monsters. And hanging from the tree is a man whose toenails are being clipped as talismans. So here is a direct reference in retrospect to that image of Goya's, and there are some others here as well. But the point that Fred makes here is that many of these horrific images in slightly different garb may appear in Los Caprichos, but here they inhabit an understandable space with atmosphere and perspective. They inhabit a space that we can understand, whether we want to think of these figures at all as real. But in Goya's Los Caprichos, there's nothing that we truly can understand as we understand this composition, which is classically based. Now, a little history, if you'll bear with me. In 1808, the French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte had already seized control of Spain. When he became dictator of France, he made a move, well, more than a move, but moves to try to annex Spain because Spain is on the Mediterranean and would have been a great prize. But by 1808, he's already invaded 1807, 1808. He's in control of Spain, and Charles IV has abdicated in hopes that his son Ferdinand VII would become king and kind of outstay the French presence. That didn't happen, and Napoleon then installed his brother Joseph Bonaparte as Spain's new ruler. Now, Spaniards refused to accept the reign of the Bonapartes, and on May 2nd, 1808, the Spanish War of Independence begins. And just a couple of more data points here. This uprising became known as the Peninsula War, and it lasted from 1808 to 1814. The conflict, as my source tells me, was the bloodiest event in Spain's modern history, with, listen to this, 215,000 to 375,000 Spanish military personnel and civilians dead because of this uprising. Now, what you're looking at here on the screen is one of Goya's major masterpieces. And it, of course, was influenced by the 2nd of May, when the Spaniards flocked in hordes over French troops, and just a horrible, horrible outpouring of anger and slaughter and rape and pillage occurred. And the French, of course, maintained control. And on the next day, the 3rd of May, they executed hundreds of Spaniards. Now, what you see is a startling contrast of individuals on the left, and then of faceless French troops on the right, who are shooting, as you can well see, without feeling, as you can imagine, these Spanish civilians. The fellow with, and I'll show you detail in a moment, the fellow in the limelight, so to speak, is tanned. He doesn't wear particularly fine clothes. He's probably a farmer or an ordinary worker otherwise. There's a lantern that sheds light on these figures, and the yellow and white of the lantern is reflected in this man's clothes. So there's a connection there across the space between the firing squad and this next victim. Below him, as you can see, is a bloody mess of a figure who has already obviously been slaughtered. There is a monk, a friar, who's prayerfully, perhaps, obtaining some kind of release from either himself or these other people. And the central figure, back to him once more, as he raises his hands, is this in defiance? Is he giving up? There's not much he can do, but what is he saying with this gesture? And what you must notice is in his palms are the marks of the stigmata. Now, Goya, as a child, was schooled at, quote unquote, the pious school, which was organized and run for poor children. We don't know very much at all about his upbringing. His father was a gilder. His mother may have had some money. We don't know. But he was raised in this way by the church. And even though in Los Caprichos, and as we'll see otherwise as well, we see his disdain and mockery of Catholic priests, still in an image like this, you have to wonder was his piety still in some way alive, using this kind of imagery, which creates of this martyr a Christian martyr like Christ, like Christ. His next series of prints become much more elaborate in terms of his technique, not only etching and aquatint, but also engraving and dry point. And he began them, as you can see from the date here, he began them during the war and before the painting you just saw. And let's see, making sure I get the dates right. It took him about a decade. And Los Desastres de la Guerra means, I think you can translate it, disasters of war, is divided into 3 segments. They're not at all equal, but just so you get an idea of something of what Goya was intending in terms of organizing this now series of 82 prints. And actually, there have been 3 others that have been discovered, so 85, we think. The first 47, and I'll again show you examples, illustrate savages of the war. And they're just, as you'll see, sinister, brutal, extraordinarily despicable, the treatment of man and man and man and woman. Now, before I get to the second part, second division, you should understand that we have no knowledge of Goya having seen most of what he represents. Some of it, perhaps, but scholars believe that these images were those like in Los Caprichos, which came from his own psyche, perhaps facilitated by what people told him, that what was going on in the war. But in any event, he did not witness everything that he represented. Let's just put it that way. The next few images, 48 to 62, represent images which have to do with the famine, which occurred in Spain, 1811 to 1812, basically after the ousting of the French. And then the last images, as Robert Hughes, that wonderful critic, put it, are disasters of peace, quote unquote, post-war Spanish politics. In any event, let's look at a few of these images, and you notice that they were not published until way after Goya's death. He died in 1828. This is the first image, and what is, I find, really quite remarkable and telling about this image is that it dates from 1819. That is, it was one of the last images Goya created for this series, but yet he placed it first. And here's a painting that I thought would help explain what we see here from that very same year by Goya, his Agony in the Garden. This is a Christ figure. The same. A Frenchman is destroying wickedly these French soldiers. Did I say this Spanish man is destroying these French soldiers in the same way that they have destroyed his confreres, his people. And notice there are no settings. There is no setting. and that continues to be the case. Now, this is an exception to virtually all of the other images we find in the disasters of war. And here I need my notes to get some of the details right here. What valor! Goya had not seen what you see here, but certainly heard about it. And this is the only instance of an actual human being who was active in the war, and as you can see, is a female and proved herself a heroine. Her name was Augustina de Aragon, from Aragon, and she brought food to the cannoneers who were protecting Zaragoza, which, by the way, is a town where Goya was born. But in any event, and when these cannoneers all fell because of French fire, she manned the cannon, as you see her here, took over. And there's no evidence that she was killed because she lived until 1857. So quite an extraordinary woman, and bless Goya for including this in the disasters of war. Excuse me. Now here's another comment. I'm not sure if it's meant sarcastically or not. You can make up your own minds. But this priest was found to possess a knife, and because of that, for a clasp knife, he was put to death. And as you can see him sitting here, with the knife around his neck, holding a cross, and wasting away, it looks like. It's hard to tell exactly how he's meeting his death, but it's not very pleasant. And then here is an elderly woman who's trying to save a young woman who is in the process of being raped. They do not want to. The woman does not want this soldier. This happened apparently all the time. This is not unusual. We know things like this happen all the time in warfare. And the next image, number 10, continues this theme. Nor do these. And here's a tumult of French soldiers and women. It's hard to tell exactly what's going on, but we know that it's rapine and not very pleasant, to say the least. But again, I keep saying this, but please keep noting there are no real spaces, understandable spaces for these figures. They exist in a black and white world. And it cannot be helped is a clear echo of that painting of May 1803, which Goya would have undoubtedly completed, or maybe he was still working on as he developed this particular image. Now, here is the only image we know Goya saw, because he tells us, I saw this. This man being pulled away from a woman, and maybe he's trying to help her. She's trying to help the child, but it's just crazy tumult. And it's, we don't know what happened. We can see what is happening, but what the outcome was, we can only imagine that it wasn't very pleasant. I saw this, Goya tells us. Now, this is the only image that I chose to show you from the series having to do with famine. I thought it was the most telling. Here are two women, it looks like, seated and lying on the ground. A young man who looks as though he's taking his last breath, and this Good Samaritan offering a cup. But what good is it? They're going to die anyway. This is Goya. And this is the worst. I thought this was particularly telling of how, excuse me, Goya expresses his disdain, in this case, also for the clergy. And here I'm working from some notes here. Churchmen and peasants kneel before a wolf. And the wolf is one of the animal symbols that Goya particularly liked to use in this final section. Um, the, um, the wolf is writing, "Wretched humanity, the fault is yours." This is the aftermath of the war. And the image reflects the disillusionment and the outrage, to some degree anyway, of what the Spanish people had to contend with after the Napoleonic troops left. They still were not in a good situation in terms of who was ruling the country, which was Ferdinand VII, by the way. The wolf is assisted by a friar, as you can see, and the wolf, along with the friar, is giving orders to these suffering people who are coming to them for help. But you can imagine that there's no help to be had. This is the worst. And the next to the last image of the disasters of war is this. Will she live again? This is an allegorical figure of truth. Will truth rise again? And plate number 82 shows her risen. But she's surrounded, if you take the time to look at the faces that are pouring over her, she's surrounded not by human beings, but by monstrous beings, primarily. Now, in 1819, Goya suffered another nearly fatal illness. Again, we don't know what the illness was. And in the next year, he created this image thanking the doctor who saved his life. And I want you to notice, before I go to the inscription below, the contrast between the patient. He's given up on himself in this image. It's quite clear, and he probably is recording exactly how he felt. And at the same time, the doctor, gently but firmly, is supporting him and making sure that he drinks whatever this cup of health may be. And on either side are faces, not monstrous faces, but dark faces of figures of which we have no idea. Again, I think you can say images from Goya's mind, dark, sinister, certainly both of those. Now, this painting has been termed an ex voto, excuse me, because of, especially because of what Goya wrote below. So let me read the translation to you. Goya, in gratitude to his friend Arrieta for the compassion and care with which he saved his life during the acute and dangerous illness he suffered towards the end of the year 1819, in his 73rd year. He painted it in 1820. Now, also in 1819, Goya purchased a farmhouse outside of Madrid, which came to be known as the Quinta del Sordo, the House of the Deaf Man. And I'm going to end with the series of paintings that Goya created, you could say, for his own pleasure, but it's hard to use that word given the nature of these images, as you will see. So, as this introductory paragraph tells you, there are 14 and actually 15 images, because one was taken away. So for a long time we thought there were just 14 images painted between 1819 and 1823. And the end date is the year before Goya left for France, interestingly enough, to take the waters for his health. At least that's what he told the king, because he needed permission to leave the country. He was still painter to the king. And he was allowed to go. And he ended up settling in Bordeaux. But for a few years, he is here at this farmhouse. And this is a model of the farmhouse. You get some idea of, the extensive nature of it, and the fact that it wasn't terribly fancy, out in the countryside. And this is a photograph of the front of the so-called Quinta del Sordo that was taken in 1900. A two-story, I'll call it villa, farmhouse. And what I have now for you are the names of the images that Goya painted, that is, the images that he painted on the two floors. And I have not attached these names, these titles, to the images because Goya did not. We do not know where these names come from. One source of mine tells me that they were named by his children subsequently. Another source tells me that art historians got into the act and decided that they knew what Goya had represented and therefore attached a title. So take your pick or combine the two. So on the ground floor is probably one of the more famous paintings of the bunch, The Goat, or Witch's Sabbath. Then A Pilgrimage to San Isidro, Saturn devouring one of his children, Judith and Holofernes, La Leocadia, and Two Old Men. Okay. Now the Prado, interestingly enough, has fairly recently rearranged the display of these paintings. And this is the only room that I could find to show you. But we know, or we think we know for the most part, where these paintings were positioned, because as they were taken off the walls in the 1860s, their positions were recorded, more or less. And so the Goat was on one long wall on the first floor, ground floor, and then Saturn and Judith and Holofernes, as you see, were paired on either side of a window. Okay. And we'll get back um, to the others in a moment. This goat is undoubtedly, as art historians have deciphered it, some kind of god. To its right, in the middle of the foreground, is a white shrouded woman who's rising from the ground, is thought that she's a nun and a follower of this goat. And as you can see, the goat is preaching to these horrifically rendered persons. What I mean by that, of course, is their faces and their expressions. And then in the far right-hand corner is this demure little girl, excuse me, who with her hands in a puff, what she's doing there, we have no idea. But she does lend a contrast to the rest, doesn't she? Now, I don't have time to chat about each of these images, but I want you, if you have never seen these images or heard of them, to understand that this artist created such paintings to live with. People didn't visit him at this place, as far as we know. He had a son and a grandson. His wife was dead. He did have a lady friend, you'll see her in a moment, who lived with him. But these were images that he created to surround him in his last days. The image of Saturn is unlike any other Saturn devouring his children you'll ever find in the history of art. What I want you to notice as we look at each of these images, however briefly, is the broad, sketchy brushwork. Now this is oil on plaster, and so he's just suggesting, for instance, Saturn's form, those legs, those arms, and look at the horrific expression on this creature's face, this God's face, as he tries to rid himself of his children who purportedly were going to take over and oust him as the god of time. Jupiter survived, his other children did not. In any event, Judith and Holofernes is another story of slaughter, as you probably know, excuse me. And this is the journey to San Isidro, a place where sacred waters were had. And it should be a joyful journey, but look at these figures. And notice that the primary color here is black, hence the term black paintings. But the mood also is very dark. On the left is Leocadia, which is purportedly a portrait of the young woman who was his maidservant and then became more than that later on to Goya, and she moved with her little girl to this place to be with him, and then later she moved also to France with him. And these two images were paired, Leocadia and this image of two men. The contrast between the two compositions, could not be greater. And on the first floor, which means to us the second floor, Asmodea, Procession of the Holy Office, the Fates, Fight with Cudgels, Man mocked by two women, men reading, the dog, Heads in a Landscape, which is the image that was lost for a time, so to speak, and old men eating soup. So we don't know. Asmodea means a kind of fantastic image. We don't know what's going on here, okay? This procession, this religious procession, also very like the other that we saw, grim, not celebratory. The three fates, except there's an addition of a fourth image that has yet to be identified. And notice that these images are floating, just like these images are floating. Fight with cudgels. These men are mired in muck and are beating one another to death. An image that Goya created to live with. Old man reading, and then an old man being mocked by two women. These were paired on either on either side of the door or a window. And the dog. A very sympathetic image, I think. Where's his owner? Is he looking up, trying to find him? It's a very dear image of a creature who's kind of lost. And it was paired. What? And it was paired with heads in a landscape. And then these two old men or old creatures eating soup. We're not sure where this was, but it was over a doorway, either on the upper floor or the lower floor. And I find it extraordinarily expressive. So, to conclude, years back, Goya produced this astoundingly beautiful work in the pilgrimage church of San Antonio de Florida in Madrid. And eventually, his remains will be transported from Bordeaux to lie beneath this dome. I think it was 1919 or 1909. And there he lies to this day, except that his head was missing, and it's yet to be found. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ellen. Does anybody, we have just a minute or so. If anybody has a question possibly for Ellen that they want to ask, or a comment, we can probably do a couple of those. If anybody's interested, they can unmute or they can put it in chat as well. Okay.
Okay, I'll go out on a limb.
Okay, go ahead.
So Ellen, the third day, 1808, extraordinary painting. As we zoomed in on the close-up of the man in white, I had a flash that his white shirt was like the white flag of surrender. So I just throw that out
Oh, I
there.
like that, Meg. I've never read read that interpretation,
Well,
but
just as we zoomed in,
there's no reason why that could not be. Uh-huh.
Wow.
Yeah.
beautiful composition in that painting.
Yes, well, unlike any at the time. This book of Fred Lick's argues for Goya as the first truly modern artist, and that painting figures greatly in that argument. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments? All right. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Ellen, for another really wonderful, wonderful presentation. I don't think that we have talked about what's coming up next, but Ellen's next presentation is probably, I think it's going to be scheduled in June, if I'm not mistaken, if we keep on the same schedule. And it's probably right in time for Art Week here in Marquette. So wonderful. So thank you everybody for coming. And if you want to share this video for this presentation will be available probably tomorrow morning. once it's uploaded, so you'll be able to find it there. But thank you, Ellen, for
Well,
another
thank you,
wonderful
Marty.
one. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And
Thank you all for coming.
yes, and hopefully we'll see you at some of the other programs that we have coming up this week and next week, and coming into April for National Poetry Month as well. So thank you everybody for coming tonight. All right.
Ciao.
See you later.
Bye, Marty. I'll see
Bye-bye.
you. I'll be back in late April. We'll get together, okay?
All right, sounds good, John.